Hello everyone, this is Catherine from Millennials in Motion magazine, and this is our first episode of Moments with Millennials of 2021. March is Cheerleading Safety Month, so today I'm sitting down with my sister Callie, who used to be a cheerleader on a competitive team and is now a cheerleading coach for a local high school. How are you doing today, Callie?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you for sitting down and talking with me about all this. So, share what your experience with cheerleading is.
Well, I did competitive cheerleading for 3 years. I was on an all-star team, and then I did sort of at the same time high school cheer for 3 years, and then I've been a cheerleading coach for 2 years. So I've definitely had about a decade of experience just being involved with the cheer world and following up on that. And competitive cheer and high school cheer are very different in the sense that if you're on a competitive team, you are essentially just performing for yourselves. You're spending the entire year creating a routine, practicing that routine until it's perfect, and then competing that routine against other people in the nation. And high school is the main thing for them is they cheer on other sports, so football, basketball, volleyball, that kind of thing. And yeah, so that's kind of where I've been at for the past 10 years.
Nice. So what are the different levels of cheerleading? What is the most dangerous?
So I would say that any level of cheerleading can be dangerous because it all just comes down to, prepping for what you're about to do. There's a lot of dangerous elements of cheerleading that, can be dangerous. Stunting, you're throwing girls up in the air. They're, 10 feet off the ground. You have tumbling where you can injure yourself very easily doing some sort of trick that you're flipping through the air. If it goes wrong, if you freak out mid-air, you can genuinely hurt yourself. So there's injuries at every level, but the different levels for competitive cheer is it's levels 1 through 7. 7 being the most difficult. You can akin level 7 to college cheer, like competitive college cheerleading, where they have very specific goals in mind when they're creating a routine. Level 1 would be forward rolls and just little thigh stands and something for not little kids to do, but it's the first level, intro level cheerleading. And 7 is when they're, building pyramids 3 people high and they're throwing people upside down in a stunt. And that's probably where most of the injuries come from, is anywhere from levels 5 to 7. And then in high school, you have, your typical freshman JV varsity squads. But again, in those levels, anybody can get hurt doing anything. Cheerleading in general is just kind of a dangerous sport, just the way that it is and the way that, we have to do things. 66% of all catastrophic injuries in high school and college come from female athletes, come from cheerleading.
Oh, wow.
So 2/3 of the injuries that come into the ER where it's catastrophic and really, really bad, those come from cheerleading.
What would count as catastrophic?
Broken bones, compound fractures, really bad head injuries, paralyzation, that kind of stuff. That would be considered catastrophic, and 2/3 of everybody that goes through that comes from cheerleading. And it is the most dangerous sport to play in terms of women, and in terms of everything, it is second only to football. But in the last couple decades, it's actually gotten a little bit better. There used to be a lot less regulation on what we could do and what we could try, and now it's a little bit stricter. So it has gotten less dangerous as the years have progressed. But, injuries happen for all kinds of reasons.
Right. Well, that's good. What kind of precautions are taken to maintain safety?
Like I said, the last couple years, I would say since I started cheerleading, which was back in 2010 or 11, there has been a lot of changes to what cheerleaders are allowed to do in competitions. Things that used to be, really crazy feats where maybe only 10 cheerleaders in the entire world could do that. They started banning those kind of special skills because it would encourage other athletes to attempt them, and it would end up with a lot of injuries of athletes getting hurt doing that. The same kind of thing happened to Simone Biles in gymnastics when she came up with all these, crazy new moves that were named after her. They gave the start value of those moves a lot less than they should have been because they were very dangerous and they did not want other athletes attempting to compete those. So they kind of did the same thing for cheerleading, where they said, you can no longer do this certain amount of, tricks in a row when you're tumbling, or that type of stunt is no longer legal because you have to hold on to them from a certain angle. Just things that are supposed to prevent injuries. And I would say they have. There's definitely a lot of things that we don't do anymore that did cause injuries, that because we don't do them now, it's definitely been a lot safer. like I said, yeah, they restrict dangerous tumbling, stunting. We also perform and practice on mats for like high school and college. There are not springs under the mats. It's just a basic like tumbling mat just on the floor. And for for competitive cheer, we do have spring mats, which are when you run and tumble and stuff, it gives you an extra boost. Those would actually probably be considered a little bit more dangerous just because you can, bounce and hurt yourself, or if there's a dead spot on the floor, you could roll your ankle. But they try to keep it as safe as possible. Obviously, they're not having us do it on, carpet or dead floor or, concrete or anything. We're really told not to do anything on those kind of surfaces because of the injuries that they can cause. And then there's also just general guidelines and like proper progression to help keep everybody safe. Obviously, if you're in level 1, they're not going to try to give you a level 3 tumbling pass or, a level 3 stunt. You have to progress your way up to that safely. And as far as where I was and what I've seen in the cheerleading world, they genuinely do not try to get cheerleaders to perform moves that are above what they can do. They're trying to minimize injuries because obviously they don't want people to be injured, because if you're injured, you can't compete for the team. So yeah, they try to keep us as safe as possible. I would just say that the only kind of drawback to all these regulations is that there's a lot less creativity in routines now, because before you'd have a team that was able to do some really crazy stunt. Maybe they were able to get all of their flyers or like top girls to do that. But now, since that's no longer allowed, you kind of see the same thing start to happen over and over again in a routine. And the only thing that's really separating people now is like choreography or like, the jump styles or the dismounts and stuff that's like very small part of the routine. But you're going to see the same stunts, the same type of tumbling from every team at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How does that all relate to like high school cheer and maintaining safety for kids?
Well, it just depends, because high school, it really depends on where the high school is, I should say. The parts of the country that focus a lot on cheerleading, like places in the South, like Texas and South Carolina, and in Florida, especially specifically, they have a lot of competitive cheer teams in high school where they take cheerleading just as seriously as they do football, basketball, any other major sport.
Because they could end up with like a scholarship to go be like a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader, essentially.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things they could do. Or, just go to college on a cheer scholarship, which a lot of, schools are really into that nowadays. Or you could even transition into something like acro and tumbling, which is actually a sanctioned sport, whereas cheer is not. But in high school, when it comes to like the lower income areas, and that's where I teach in a low income area and I coach at a low income school, there is not a lot that's expected of us. We don't compete because we can't afford the competition fees, and a lot of schools can't do that. So we don't tend to have a lot of injuries. We definitely still have regulations, and there's a lot of rules that we have to follow. We follow the NIAA rules, which is like here in Nevada, it's the Nevada Interscholastic like something where it just controls all of the sports, and we have to follow what they say, go based off of their rules. And that's pretty much what we have to follow. But because we don't compete, there's a lot of things that we don't attempt and things that we don't try. And that kind of is just, where we're at. We just do what we can with what we have. And most teams actually don't even have mats. Like I said, like before, that like flat mat, our school has 3. I think an actual full cheer floor has 9. So we're missing 6 mats to even make it a full cheer floor. So we have to just kind of use what we have around us. And a lot of teams are like that. So that can definitely lead to injuries if we end up having to stunt on, the track or like the hardwood floor of the gym or something like that.
Right, where it's not as easy to be throwing yourself at the ground in that capacity.
Yeah, and I think that makes girls a little bit more nervous too. And when you're nervous, it's a little bit, harder to break through and get, those higher level skills, because they're like, oh my gosh, we're not even on a mat. I'm literally staring at the, floor of the gymnasium right now. I'm a little bit nervous. So that's honestly where a lot of injuries come from too, is just not having the confidence in yourself to complete the skill and kind of bailing on it.
Right. So what safety measures would you like to see implemented that would also allow for, more creativity, but also maintaining that essence of safety?
Honestly, so we have a meeting every single year where they discuss the changes that they've made to cheerleading and what we can do, what we've changed, what we've made better, what we've, just kind of, not us, but the people above us that decide those things. And I believe that there is enough restrictions on sports to keep us physically safe. Like I've said in the past, at least 5 to 10 years, since I've been involved, I've seen the sport drastically change in terms of what is allowed to be competed, because we obviously are only going to train the things that will give us the points necessary to, win a competition. And if you're a non-competitive team like my cheerleaders are, we still try to be as safe as possible, because at every single game, yeah, we can show off, or at an assembly we can show off, but if what we're doing is not sanctioned and somebody gets hurt, that falls back on the cheer coaches. And obviously we're not trying to put ourselves in that situation. So we followed the rules, to a T pretty much, just to keep the kids safe. And I truly believe there's enough restrictions in that sense. But safety is more than about bodily injury just from, competing in the sport. It also has to do with like mental health. I will say that in the competitive cheer world, just like any sport that is driven, female led from young age, there's going to be the idea of like, eating disorders and body dysmorphia, and, girls that they want to be the flyer, they want to be the smallest girl that's put into the air, or they want to be tiny so that they can flip better. It's kind of like the same thing as gymnastics in that sense of like, the smaller you are, quote unquote, the better you'll be at that sport. But with cheer, that's simply not true, because we do need girls that are strong and muscular that can hold up other girls.
Right.
Most of our power tumblers are, muscular. They're not tiny like you would see in like old gymnastics videos. So the mental health aspect where, we're not putting cheerleaders who embody what we think all cheerleaders should be on a pedestal, because I definitely remember the time of cheer celebrities. I don't follow it as closely anymore, but when I was in it, we had girls that were, stick thin, tan skin, bleach blonde hair, pearly white teeth, always had their hair and makeup perfect for every competition. They had the abs, and that became known as like, the inspiration for cheerleading. It's like, this is what you should, strive to look like. And a lot of girls don't look like that and can't look like that and won't ever look like that. So that takes a toll on the mental health, as well as, favoritism by the coaches, kind of putting people in situations they might not be comfortable with. There was more than a few times when somebody was out, I was asked to go up in a stunt or do something that I'd never done before. Even to the point where we were at a competition before day 2, they wanted to put me into a completely different tumbling section so that I had to do a harder skill to gain more points. But I had never competed the skill before. I'd barely even practiced it. Like, I had the skill, but not consistently enough to know that I could throw it in the competition. And they were really close to being like, you're going to have to throw it. Like, you're going to have to go out there and do it. And I was like, but what if I mess it up? Like, it was a lot. There's a lot of the mental health aspect. And then, of course, in high school, cheerleaders have this stigma around them where they're very much like, the popular girls, the pretty girls. Only certain girls can be on the team. You have to look a certain way or act a certain way. And, that can really hurt a lot of girls too, being on the team or not being able to get onto the team. So that's a huge part of it. And I would like to see a little bit more accountability and responsibility from coaches to kind of try to break those stigmas and bring girls in and make it a more, equitable place to be. And then kind of on the flip side of that is we had like all these things come out recently about, athlete A and the gymnastics world, and about how there are sexual predators in sports like this. Anytime you're working with young girls, young children in general, but just young girls specifically, you're going to have people that don't belong in that world or should not be in that world 110%. And I don't know. I've never worked at a, cheerleading gym before, but I don't know the type of background checks they go through. People get into those positions because they're friends of the owners, because they know people in that world. They're older athletes that are coming back to coach, or, just friends from, old cheer days. And you just never know who a person is. People can think they know somebody. They can spend hours and hours with them every day at practice, hanging out, whatever. And you'll just never know who they are. Because, we see that with the show that came out last year at the beginning of quarantine, actually. It was called Cheer on Netflix, and it kind of took the world by storm, and it put cheerleading in a big spotlight of, like, we should be a sport. Look at how great this sport is. Look at this, and, look how hard these cheerleaders work. And while that was awesome that it got us that platform, there was a lot of people that came out of that praising some of the cheerleaders on there and, becoming big fans of them. And because of that, there was, a guy that cheered for Navarro, and his name was Jerry, and he ended up taking advantage of a couple very underage fans. I think they were like 12 or 13 at a cheer competition. And, that kind of stuff comes out, and it just devastates everybody around you, because this was like the most beloved person on that program. They loved him from, his old program, from where he coached, from where he practiced. Like, they loved him everywhere. Everybody knew his name. They were like, yeah, be like a Jerry. He's always hyping people up. And again, you never know the different sides of people until it comes out. And I don't think cheer has had that big reckoning yet. I feel like we're right on like the precipice of it, where something is going to come out, where someone is going to come forward, and then it's just going to start coming out, because this is one of the only sports where you have 12-year-old girls on the same team as 18, 19-year-old men. And it's, there's definitely a dynamic there that they're going to look up to those guys. They're the most popular on the team. It's hard. And then you have the coaches, obviously, who get really close with athletes, who will start driving them to practice or hanging out with them. And, teachers specifically, because we work in an environment with children, have to have that disconnect. We have to have that separation from students. We're not allowed to have those kind of relationships for a very good reason. No matter how pure your intentions, you shouldn't be alone with students. You shouldn't be alone with athletes. That's just the world that we live in now. And there is no restrictions on that whatsoever in the competitive cheerleading world. I truly believe we'll see something come out very soon about everything related to, it's going to be coaches, it's going to be older boys on the team, and, people that they just allow into the gym. It could be, dads, it could be anybody, because people have so much access at a cheerleading gym. They'll bring in choreographers from other places, and, tumbling instructors will come in and, be there for a little while. So I don't know. Those are the things that I would like to see more focused on, more of the mental health aspect and more of the like protecting children from, predators, and less about the actual like physical, like, limitations of cheerleading, because we've spent the last decade doing that. We don't need to do much more of that. I don't think we're at a good point where injuries are not as bad as they were, 20 years ago. And there's more important things, more current things to focus on.
Right, and that's enabled, the attention to be shifted to these other things like mental health and the potential for sexual abuse in the realm of this, sport and everything.
Exactly. And I would say like gymnastics, we've followed along their same path very closely, where it's like they went from praising these very, very skinny, thin girls and kind of promoting the idea of, well, maybe you shouldn't eat today. Maybe if you want to get smaller, maybe you should, go to the bathroom and purge a little bit. Like, there was things that were said to keep girls small. And, I feel like there was definitely a lot of that in cheer. There was the idea that if you're a flyer at a certain age, say that you're 10 years old and you're a flyer on a team, you haven't gone through puberty yet. So when you do start to go through puberty, you get that growth spurt, you get a little bit more meat on your bones, and maybe you no longer can fly. That is a really big like hit to your ego and a really big hit to your like mental health and your self-image, because you went from being like this amazing flyer who was really small and tiny to all of a sudden you now have to be a back spot or a base or something, and it completely changes your idea of how you see yourself. So we haven't spent enough resources on like focusing on being like, that's okay. Everybody has a place in cheerleading. We need small girls, we need big girls, we need girls in between. Like, it's a whole dynamic. It's not an individual sport like gymnastics is. It's a team sport, and we need all types of girls to be able to compete.
Right, and without like pitting them against each other and making it like it's a competitive sport, but it shouldn't be competitive within
the girls.
Yeah, because then you might end up with a situation where maybe one girl doesn't like another girl and she drops her or something.
I mean, that kind of thing. The idea of like girls not liking girls, it's going to happen all the time. There's going to be jealousy. There's going to be, people not getting along just because personalities are going to clash. Anytime you put 20 girls together, there's going to be, issues. And I mean, I've seen that with every team I've ever been on and every team I've coached. There's just always girls that seem to be, instigators or try to cause problems. There's always girls who get left behind, who don't feel like they have a place on the team. And, again, you just get all sorts of people onto the team, and you kind of have to smush all these personalities and ages together. That's one of the biggest things is you'll have little girls on a team, 12 years old, just turned 12, with 19-year-old girls and boys who are out smoking and drinking and hanging out with coaches. And, it's a really weird dynamic, and people don't talk about that enough.
Right. So how has COVID impacted safety around cheerleading?
Well, of course, at the beginning, kind of like every other sport ever, in this time period, they had to shut down right away because cheer is a close contact sport. Obviously, we're stunting, we're touching feet, hands, body, face to face, right with another girl when we're stunting. We all tumble on the same mat, so we're touching everywhere on the mat when we're walking and, doing stuff. And then actually and I'm not sure if this came out just because of COVID or if they were already working on this, But this year they've introduced a no stunting category, which is where you just tumble the entire. They've had like non-tumbling teams where you can just stunt the whole time and jump and do choreography, and now they're doing a no stunting aspect, which is, stunting is probably like, I would say 65 to 70% of all cheerleading, because we have our individual stunts, we have baskets, and we have our pyramid, which is when we all come together and stunt together in a group. And then the rest of the time is filled up by, some tumbling passes and then some dancing and jumps. And so, stunting is a huge part of what we do. So to have a team that is just no stunting, it's only tumbling, only choreography, it's definitely a different dynamic. But for some people, they can't stunt. For some people, tumbling really is their best thing, and stunting is really hard for them. So I think that allows people to have a little bit more access to cheerleading, just like taking away the no tumbling thing was. And then they use masks, but they have said that while the girls and boys are competing, they don't have to wear their masks on stage. So again, it's one of those things where it's like, if you're going to allow one thing, why don't you allow everything? If you're, because if they have to practice with masks,
for stuff.
Yeah, if they practice with masks and they're backstage with masks on, but then they go out to compete on the floor and they're right in front of each other, touching and doing all that stuff without masks on, you can very, very easily spread COVID that way. So it's been hard. They've tried to do some virtual competitions. They've done a couple in person, just depending on, the state that allows in person versus virtual stuff. And that's pretty much all they've been able to do. We haven't had like a backup plan for what would happen if we couldn't, be near each other, because cheer is such a contact sport. I mean, it's not as easy to adapt to as like cross country is, or something where you're just running the whole time and you're kind of away from everybody. It is very close contact, and yeah, so that's they've tried to do as well as they can, but there has been cases, of course, that have broken out amongst everybody.
Right, it's an inevitability, it seems.
Yeah, kind of for any sport.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier about how cheerleading is not actually considered a sport, and to me that's crazy, especially having seen the stuff that you would do. Like, how is it not considered a sport? It's like, and how you said, like, it's even more of an intense sport type thing than a lot of other things that are classified like as quote unquote legitimate sports.
So by definition, is cheerleading a sport? Yes, it is. It's, highly rigorous. We have to, practice for what we do. We compete against each other. So in the terms of definition of a sport, cheerleading is a sport. But by NCAA, which is, the ruling body over college athletics, and Title IX, which regulates sports by the federal government, it is not considered a sport. In 2012, they petitioned to allow it to be an NCAA sport, and allowed it to be, Title IX officially, a federally backed sport. And in 2012, it was denied. So it's been almost 10 years. I would assume that they're about ready to go up to them again and kind of ask. And when that happened, they essentially said cheerleading is very disorganized. There's no real central body for it. But this was 2012. This was my second year in the cheerleading world, and I do actually have to agree with that. Cheer was kind of all over the place at that time. We had a governing body. It's called the USASF, but it's not, back then it didn't really make a lot of regulations. It didn't keep everything kind of the way that it is now, where it's very locked down. It was all over the place, and NCAA has a hard time classifying it because it is a co-ed sport, and no other NCAA sports are co-ed. So they've actually introduced a new sport. It's called stunt, and it's supposed to be just like an all-girls sport, all-women sport, where it's cheerleading essentially, but they're trying to get that classified as NCAA so that, they can start including that in college sports. The closest thing we have to this as a sport is acro and tumbling, which is, there's building things kind of like stunts. They tumble together, and they're on the same type of mat that we use for cheerleading. Big, colleges like Baylor and Oregon use that, and a lot of former cheerleaders end up making their way over there. But yeah, as of right now, it is not technically a sport, and, because of that, there's, different funding, different, people, there's the respect issue of it all. So yeah, I mean, we do kind of get left out there. And at the end of the day, the main idea of cheerleading, especially at a college or high school level, is supporting other teams. That is the main job. If you're a cheerleader, you know that on Friday nights you have to go to a football game, and you just might also happen to have practice on Saturday for your competition. In college, they don't do a lot of little competitions throughout the year. There's one really big competition at the end, and it's held in Daytona Beach, Florida. and that's the only thing they go do. So they practice all year long to compete one time, for 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And that's not very sport-like, considering they can't, every week play against a different team. We can't have competitions every weekend.
Right.
So it's hard to organize it for sure. That's pretty much the main reason. But like I said, they are trying to push for this new thing like stunt to go through and become an actual sport.
Well, that's cool. Do you think it ever got that designation from that governing body that it would ever be, say, in like the Olympics or something?
There's definitely been talk about that as well, trying to push for it to be in the Olympics. And right now in cheerleading, we have a major competition for competitive cheerleading. It's called the World Championship. I wouldn't say it's very worldwide. It's obviously held in the United States, in Florida at Walt Disney World every single year, so it doesn't travel to different countries like, say, the Olympics would. But there are countries that are able to fly out there and compete, like Canada, and we have Brazil and Australia and a bunch of other countries that are able to go out there. But cheerleading is very much an American sport through and through. And so I don't know if they see it to be necessary to have it in the Olympics, because it's basically like throwing that a party for America. America would win every single time, hands down, and that's not to say that other, cheerleaders in other nations are not good at what they do. Cheerleading in America is just very supported. We have a lot of money here. We have a lot of backing for rich families to put their cheerleaders in, to that kind of stuff, or put their daughters and sons into cheerleading. And there's a lot of like desire to be cheerleaders in America, whereas in other places, this is not a sport that's very much desired. They have a lot of other things that are above that. So for it to be in the Olympics, it would just be, America winning over and over again every 4 years. And so much in that sport changes in that amount of time. It would be hard to keep up with all the changing regulations and rules. Like I said, we've changed everything every other year in cheerleading, where we've gotten rid of stuff, we put it back in, we took out certain stunts, then took out tumbling and that kind of stuff. It's hard to keep up with. Like, it's not an established sport in the sense that we know what the rules are. We know that's not going to change. This is how we can prepare for that for the next 4 years. And then, on top of that, these, kids are doing cheer their entire lives. So are they going to be put on a separate team to, try for the Olympics? Are they all going to get thrown together? We have a Team USA cheerleading group that performs at the Worlds competition, and it's literally just the best of the best college cheerleaders or level 7 cheerleaders that get thrown together on a team for about a month. They prepare their routine and are expected to hit that. So would it be something like that, or would these girls be, training for 4 years like gymnasts do to prepare for this? So
right.
There's just a lot to kind of get into, and it's hard to push for that when, again, it really is disorganized in the way that cheer is right now. It's very centered on how do you want your gym to run things? How do you want it to compare to other gyms locally?
Right.
We're not looking at this at a global scale.
It's not very homogenous.
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, we have our overarching guidelines, obviously, like I've said, but in general, it's, it's kind of just whatever that gym sees fit to do, they're going to do that. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, what would you like to see in the world of cheerleading in any aspect, whether it's safety or anything else we've talked about, or something that, we haven't brought up, anything like that?
Well, like I said, coaching in a lower income area, it's really hard to see so many, girls, boys, everybody in between not have access to cheerleading, simply because of how expensive it is just to kind of participate. And as much as, you can fundraise and stuff like that, it's really hard to do if you're not in a community that supports that kind of stuff. But I mean, for cheerleading, if you think about like football, a lot of the stuff that football players have is purchased by the school. They don't purchase their uniforms, their pads, their helmets. They might purchase their shoes, maybe if the school is not sponsored for that. But in general, these other sports don't have a lot of things they have to pay for. Cheerleading is very different in the way that, almost every girl needs a custom uniform. You can have small, medium, and large and kind of just try to fit the girls into that, but every single year you're going to have a different team. There's going to be larger girls, smaller girls, and you're going to have to end up buying new uniforms, and they're very expensive. Like the good quality ones that don't rip, that don't fray, that don't tear, those are going to be expensive uniforms. And then on top of that, the cheerleaders also all have to buy their own shoes, their own bows, their own pom-poms, their own bags, everything that is just needed to be able to cheer. And that list grows if you're in areas where it snows, because then you need head wraps and jackets and liners and briefs and all of that extra stuff, and it's, you know, it's a lot of money. That's just for the uniform, and then if you want to compete, that's thousands of dollars. And it's hard to convince parents to shell out, you know, hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars for a sport like this, because most teams don't even compete. So how are you going to ask, like, for example, my team to be on the varsity team is going to cost $800, and we know that that is a lot of money to ask for parents. So we set up payment plans, we do fundraising, all that stuff, but there are still some girls that see that price tag and get turned away by it. So I wish there was a way to make cheer a little bit more accessible and, you know, easily affordable for, you know, low income areas. And then going back to what I said earlier about, you know, the accountability from gym owners and coaches, where they let things like slide under the rug. You know, they hear things, they hear that coaches are drinking with athletes or smoking with athletes or, you know, engaging in certain inappropriate behavior. And we go to a lot of competitions away from our state. I think when I was in cheer, I went to like 4 or 5 outside of my own state. And then, you know, obviously we had like 4 or 5 in state as well. We had about 1 or 2 every single month. And, you know, there's obviously a lot of time for cheerleaders to go and mingle with not only their coaches, but other coaches from other areas. And it's not appropriate. And I know that it kind of just gets swept under the rug a lot. So I would like to see some more accountability and responsibility from gym owners and coaches. And then just in general, recognition in high school. It's hard to get girls to want to do this sport, to want to try it, because there is such a stigma around it being the bratty girls, the preppy girls, the, you know, the mean girls that do cheerleading. And I want to try to break that stigma, because those are the exact type of girls that I don't want on my team. That's literally, we told our girls back at tryouts, like, we'll put people on here if you are able to get a rhythm and you're able to, you know, remember a cheer. Like, we don't care as much about, you know, being the best of the best. We don't want you guys to fight for like the best stunting and, you know, the best tumbling. We want you to do as well as you can, but that's not what we're worried about. We're worried about you being a team player and being a good leader and being friendly and helpful, because that's what, in our mind, that's what cheerleading's about. So I would like to see a little bit more of that stigma broken, but that's just going to come from the individual schools. I don't want the people at my school to look at my girls and say, oh my gosh, yeah, those are the bitches of the school. You know, we don't want that on them. So
You want them to be role models.
Exactly, and that's what we tell them. And it's hard for them to get in that mindset as well, because some of these girls, you know, cheerleading coaches they move out of the sport really quickly, especially at the high school level, and especially teams that don't compete, because, you know, you do it for a year and a half, you do it for 2 years, and you're kind of like, okay, I'm burnt out, I'm tired. It's a lot of work for almost no pay. And you really have to have a passion for it and an understanding of it. And a lot of people that end up as cheer coaches have zero idea what cheer is about. They were maybe gymnastics people or dance people, or, you know, just don't really have a background in it. Maybe they did Pop Warner 1 year, and it just gives the girls an opportunity to just kind of run amok. And it takes a while to rebuild that reputation. And so that's what me and the other coach that I work with are trying to do. We're trying to rebuild this program, and obviously this was not the year to do it. You know, we started, right. We had a team, practiced for like 2 weeks, and then we all got disbanded, and we just kind of been hanging on, and they officially canceled our season a couple months ago, and that's kind of just where we've been. But, you know, we're hoping to kind of come back next season and make things a little bit better. So
yeah,
you know.
Well, that'll be really exciting, and I'm really like happy to hear like your perspective on cheerleading in general, but also how you as a cheerleading coach want to, you know, steer your girls in this direction, where it's just like it's a team thing, you know, being role models to each other, to other people in the school and stuff, and like you said, break that mean girl stigma. And I think that's really important, and I don't think a lot of people talk about that. I haven't, you know, heard anyone talk about it, so I'm glad that people like you are aware of that issue and are making moves to change that and everything. I think that's really important.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with me. Did you have any other comments or anything that you wanted to make?
I would just say overarching, like I don't anticipate many people who don't care about cheerleading listening to this, but if this is somebody who's like, oh, you know, I don't really have an idea about cheerleading, I would just say try to forget everything you know about cheerleading in terms of what you've seen on TV, the Bring It On movies, you know, that kind of, you know, way about it.
Right. The way media like
portrays it.
Exactly. And I think that in itself led to the whole mean girl, you know, bitchy cheerleader like trope, essentially.
Right. And it also is where we lose respect and lose footing in terms of becoming NAA or NCAA, you know, sponsored and, you know, federally sponsored with Title IX. So, because people think cheerleading and they think of that media idea of what a cheerleader is. And they're like, you guys are just, you dress up cute and you wave pom-poms in the air, and that is not even 25,000% of what we do. It's literally nothing. So I would urge you to look up YouTube videos of competitive cheerleading, watch the show Cheer on Netflix, because even though, like, I would say there's definitely some problematic things on that show, again, just the way they show things, especially when it comes to injuries. There's a lot of cheerleaders who push through some really, really bad injuries to continue to perform. But that shows the reality of what we're facing right now. And while that should change, it'll give people a good idea of like where we're at as a sport right now.
Right. Well, thank you so much again for sharing everything and giving your perspective on the world of cheerleading and how to make it more safe and everything.
Yeah, thanks for having me on and for making this a priority this month. I'm really happy to be here.
Yay. Thank you guys for listening. We will see you next time. Bye.